All right, today we're talking about how to target the right investors for your company. So if you're looking to raise money, then we're going to be talking about the types of mistakes the companies make, sometimes targeting the wrong types of investors. My guest today is David Rose. I'll tell you more about him in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi, welcome everyone. John Corkin here. I'm the host of this show. And, every week we talk to smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of companies. We've had Netflix and Grubhub, Redfin, Gusto, Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation, Blizzard. Check out the archives. Lots of great episodes for you to check out there. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise25, our company where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with Done For You podcasts and content marketing. And David is going to talk about how he has built connections with the right people using different strategies. And that's something that I love to do. David and I had a great conversation at the beginning before this about some different things that we have in common. And so that's why I love selfishly interviewing people like David here today. So check us out at rise25.com. All right, let me tell you about David. So David, first of all, shout out to Bill Kenny of Meet, who introduced me to David today. Meet ROI is Bill's website. They help companies that exhibit at trade shows to get more ROI out of their trade shows. But David is the CEO of U.S. Expansion Partners. He has over 20 years of leadership experience with Fortune 500 companies and high growth firms and startups in technology, internet, and media industries. He is based in North Carolina, but he is a veteran of a number of different pitch days, including Google Demo Day, Silicon Valley Open Doors, TechCrunch Disrupt, which to me, that has always been the most intimidating type of environment, going in and you've got, 3 minutes or 45 seconds or whatever it is to do your elevator pitch. It seems so intimidating. So I, as a former speechwriter, am in awe of you, David, having competed in these different exhibitions and won some of them as well. So we're going to talk about your background. But first, let's start. I love to start with what people were like as a kid, because I think that oftentimes illustrates what we are as an adult. But you were in fourth, fifth grade, and you decided you wanted a motorcycle. You grew up in the country. Now there's a lot of parents that wouldn't dare give their kid a motorcycle at age 11 or 12, but you decided you wanted one. And tell us about how you got one.
Well, it was my first big sale that I closed. It was tough because, we had an orthopedic surgeon lived across the street who would consistently tell my parents horror stories of motorcycle wrecks. But I wanted a motorcycle really badly. And we lived in a fairly rural area, so there's a lot of space to ride. So, part of the deal was you had to stay off the road. So, man, I just really worked with my parents for years and years. It seemed like forever. And when I got to fifth grade, I finally closed the deal, and they finally said, okay, you can have a motorcycle. And I was like, great, I have the right one picked out. Let's go get it today. And they were like, oh, no. You have to pay for it. I'm like, but I'm 12. How am I going to buy a motorcycle? So that was the first hurdle was overcome, but the second hurdle presented itself pretty quickly.
So you had to figure out a way to make money at age 12. And so what did you do?
Well, there's your limited options when you're 12. You don't have a driver's license. You really can't travel very far. So I did what a lot of kids my age and in my situation did. As I started mowing yards, and I was fortunate in that my mom was in real estate at the time and a top producer, so she had lots of inventory who needed to be mowed. So I kind of had a built-in inventory of customers I could start with. So I mowed a lot of yards. I think I saved up $600 to buy my first used motorcycle as a 12-year-old in the 80s. It was something I was really passionate about and spent a lot of time and a lot of great memories and really loved motorcycles. But that was the start of it.
And I know you're a big fan of cycling now, which we talked about earlier, but you have this long history. You've worked at so many different startups, and I want to get into those. But your first experience was actually a startup within a larger corporate environment. So you actually worked for ADP, which is a large company, and ended up kind of doing a startup within the larger corporate environment. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I was really fortunate. I think to this day, ADP was a great place to start my career. I got to do 7 different jobs there in 7 years, so I got to see and do a lot. And I had a really unique experience where I got to be on the launch team for a brand new product. So I was employee number three for a new product that hit. And so it grew to $150 million in revenue in less than 2 years. We bought a $400 million publicly traded company, and it's grown into a $5 billion line of business for ADP called Total Source. It's the PEO business. So we launched that for them in the late 90s. So we got to do all the fun startup stuff, rapid growth, trying to figure it all out, late nights, all those sort of things, without having to worry about making payroll or raising capital because you're housed inside a Fortune 500 company. So it was definitely a great first corporate experience and great first startup experience.
Do you think that it was easier in that sense because you had resources and things like that? Like looking back on it now?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You don't, as a startup founder now, you spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about capital and making payroll and cash and those sort of things. When you're in that environment, you still have the same challenges of trying to figure out product market fit and the right pricing model and the right economics and go to market, but you really don't have those pressures of, oh my gosh, how are we going to make payroll next week?
Yeah. What was it like then later when you had your own companies and you weren't housed in a large company and you founded your own company and you had to bootstrap it? Like, oh crap, this is what it's really like.
Yeah, well, because you do have lots of challenges and lots of hurdles in a startup, even inside a Fortune 500 company. I mean, honestly, at this stage, my freak out threshold is really high because I've kind of seen it and done it all. So I'm like, oh, okay, that problem, we can overcome that. I've kind of learned that nothing's fatal for the most part. So I think it's kind of a collective experience during the time. And it started with that first startup inside of ADP, but over time, you're kind of like, oh, yeah, that challenge. Yeah, that looks really bad, but I think we can figure it out.
Yeah. You've had different types of companies. You haven't stuck in one industry. Has that been you following your passion, your interest, looking for opportunities? Talk a little bit about, because there's some, for some people, hopping from industry to industry can prove a big challenge, especially if they don't know about the industry.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I have this curse where I'm kind of naturally drawn to frontier tech. I can immediately see a new technology that comes on board. I can immediately kind of see, oh man, I really get the value this can deliver to enterprise customers. I've spent most of my time in B2B. And so I'm a little bit cursed in this and like, oh, I totally get this new technology. And there's been a few times, more than once, where I've been right, but been a decade too early. And so those are pretty painful experiences. But I have this thing where I can kind of look and get it pretty early on, and oftentimes, unfortunately, too early.
Well, I mean, there's lots of examples like that, right? Webvan, pets.com, stuff like that, companies that were way too early, but way later, these, models exist today. It's just that maybe the market wasn't ready for it. Looking back now, what is your advice to a young founder that is pursuing that new thing? Maybe now it's AI or whatever's after AI. How do you advise them to know whether now is the right time or whether they're too early?
I think it's a really difficult personal judgment call to make if you're in it because you believe and you're passionate about it. I would say make sure you have truth tellers around you who you trust to tell you like, hey, it's really the time's not right. I remember I was in a situation in a frontier tech company, and I was really passionate about it, really believed in it, and I had a really known VC in the LA area who I've met a few times, and I told him I was having problems, and he said, "Hey, next come out and pitch me. Let me tell you my opinion on it." And he said, "Look, David, all the things you're saying are true, and they're all going to happen in 10 to 12 more years." So having somebody kind of say, hey, you're right, but the time that somebody you trust to kind of say, hey, you're right about this, but you'd be better off spending your time and other priorities right now. I think it's super
Right.
helpful.
Right.
Try it, work really hard, go hard, but have people around you who you trust who will tell you the truth of when it's time to maybe make a pivot or make a directional change altogether.
Now, a lot of your career has been spent in North Carolina, and you said that it's a lot harder for someone who's not located in, say Silicon Valley or the Bay Area or something like that to raise money. So talk a little bit about what those challenges have been like for you being, from an outlying area and how you've overcome them.
Yeah, there's a lot. This same investor I'm talking about who gave me the great advice, I pitched him pretty early on when I was CEO of a company. And he said to me, he said, David, I really like you. I like the story. I think this is going to be really big, but we're not going to invest in you. And I said, why not, Mark? And he said, well, because we don't have another single portfolio company in North Carolina. And we're very active investors. We go to monthly board meetings, and I'm not going to get on a plane once a month to fly across the country for a board meeting for your company. So we're not going to invest for that reason only.
Hmm.
So there's real challenges if you're outside the Bay Area, outside New York to raising. That's one of them. Um, access to investors. Like you're not going to run into people at
Not going to
Starbucks
bump into them at Starbucks. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You're not going to run into those investors serendipitously. So yeah, it can be a real challenge outside of the region. And we work with companies. My company right now helps companies expand into the U.S. from overseas, mostly venture-backed tech companies, and they almost all want to raise capital here. So they kind of face that same problem. If you're coming from Germany or the UK and you want to raise money in Silicon Valley or New York, they're going to face some of those same challenges. So we've kind of developed some methodologies to kind of help, some learnings to kind of help them hopefully be more productive in their fundraising than I was early on from North Carolina in mine.
Yeah. And one of the things you've done is just reaching out to other founders that have certain investors and asking for an introduction. That sounds a little bit crazy. Like maybe it, like why would someone who's never met you before, why would they say yes to that and offer to introduce you to their investor? Talk a little bit about how you manage that to work.
Well, one of the things I learned early on that's kind of unspoken in the venture capital community is, and look, let me give those guys a break for a second. I can't imagine what the inbound email volume is for a managing partner at a tier one VC firm on St.
Oh,
Louis
crazy.
on a daily basis,
They
right?
must get 50 emails a day. Yeah.
Well, 50,000. I mean, it's probably
Yeah. Yeah.
ridiculous, right? And
Yeah.
so I'm empathetic to their journey, but as a founder, what I've learned, one of the real important steps I've learned is you really need to get a personal introduction. That really goes a long way as far as getting attention from the right partner at the firm. So there's a whole process, finding the right firm, finding the right partner. But really, one of the secrets is getting a personal introduction to the right partner. And you kind of have a process where ideally you would look on LinkedIn and say, oh, I want to talk to this partner. Oh, look, John's a tier one connection with him. Let me ask for an introduction. But if you're in North Carolina, or the UK, you might not have that same network built out. So you have to start thinking about other ways in. And I tried traditional methods, whether it be through, hey, who my Silicon Valley Bank helps with introductions, or the law firm I'm using might help with introductions. But you kind of run out of those. Kind of that tier two I would go to is start looking at the portfolio companies of a particular partner that I want to invest in and reaching out to them directly. And I was really pleasantly surprised. Like one of the things I always look back on from my time as a CEO in the venture-backed world is how many CEOs of venture-backed tech companies that I reached out to cold and asked for introductions to their investors, how many of them helped me? And
Mm.
just never meeting me, never knowing me reaching out to them, asking for help, an introduction to their investor, and them actually doing that. That was hugely helpful and hugely valuable to get that personal introduction from a CEO of a portfolio company. And what I found is those CEOs are generally pretty empathetic, to another CEO's fundraising plight. They know what a
Hmm.
terrible, hard process that is, and they're more willing to help than you might imagine at first.
Yeah. Now tell us about some of these experiences with these pitch days. So Silicon Valley Open Doors was a big one that you won, and then later Google Ventures.
Yeah, so we were, I did a lot of stuff in the Valley for a North Carolina company. So, like you mentioned, we were a Google Demo Day finalist, and we got to demo at TechCrunch Disrupt. And we were the overall winner at Silicon Valley Open Doors, which completely blew me away. So for Google Demo Day, we are part of the Google Tech Hub at the American Underground here in Durham, North Carolina. And there's kind of a bake-off, and it kind of comes down to, I think, like 8 companies or whatever make the finals. And once you make it to Google Demo Day finals, Google really brings out all the resources to help you. They bring in pitch coaches and designers to help with the deck. Your pitch is vetted by a managing partner at Google Ventures. They really get you ready to pitch and your deck and the story and that whole thing. So you're really prepared. And because we were a Google Demo Day finalist, they had a last minute cancellation at Silicon Valley Open Doors. So somebody I knew somebody there. They invited me to come pitch at Silicon Valley Open Doors because we'd made the Google finals. And I got there and I immediately felt like I was way in over my head. I mean, it's really impressive. So you're at the Computer Science Museum, and all the judges are all like from, Lightspeed and Excel and all those sort of things. And the company pitches, I'm watching the other companies pitch. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in way over my head. These companies are awesome. And we ended up winning. Like, you could have knocked me over at the end. I'm 6'4", I'm really tall. And at the end, they have all 34 CEOs get on the stage, and I'm standing in the back because I'm really tall and I'm figuring I'm just here for the ride. And at the end, they said, and the overall
That's
winner
your
is
name.
Personas. And I was like,
Wow.
what?
Wow.
So it was a great experience for sure.
And so there's a lot of work that goes into these things. Well, first of all, what stage is a startup when they participate in these? Are they kind of like seed round? Do you have like a working
Yes.
demo, or do you just have a
This stage,
wireframe?
we'd already, we were, and one of the things like, if especially if you're not in the Bay Area or New York, you have to kind of have show more market traction to get attention from investors. So at this stage, well, we'd already raised $1 million in angel funding, and we already had, I can't remember how much revenue, probably approaching $1 million in overall revenue. So we had some good market traction, some, kind of product market fit signals. So, kind of we were post seed, kind of about raising an A round at that stage.
Okay. And then did you find that participating in these competitions like really put you on the map? Did it change everything? Or, what was the reaction like afterwards?
One thing I have learned, I've had a bunch of like big events happen to me as a startup founder, and one thing I've learned is like none of them are make or break. Like there's
Mm.
nothing like no one event. Like I used to think to, oh my gosh, I made it to Google
Like
Demo Days.
this one, if I get on Shark Tank, then everything will change.
It's all downhill from here, and it's not. It's accumulation of all those sort of lucky breaks and good fortune and hard work. So there wasn't like one where it kind of turned it all around, but cumulatively, you start building up a reputation. And I'll never forget, I was feeling after we made it to Google Demo Day, and we'd already gone through kind of the pitch refinement, the deck refinement, and I was feeling pretty good about it. The pitch had already been vetted by Google Ventures and gotten the thumbs up. I came back and this is a prep for that. I came back and won. So I was the overall winner at Silicon Valley Open Doors. Well, the actual pitch event at Google wasn't for like 10 more days. So I just stayed in the valley. I'm like, oh, well, I'm just going to stay and fundraise. I'm going to go make a bunch of pitches because I can open some doors now that I have some credibility and I've won this
And
event.
refine your pitch too. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm feeling good about my pitch. And it was pretty humbling because I remember like I spent days on Sand Hill Road, and like basically every person I talked to told me my deck was shit, my pitch was shit, my product was shit, and I didn't know what I was doing. I'm like, well, wait a minute. I just won Silicon Valley Open Doors. I'm like, Google blessed all this. And it's, what I learned is it's kind of what I tell entrepreneurs now is it's a bit of a sport. Like when someone
Mm,
comes into pitch, it's a bit of a sport to tell them how bad their deck is and how bad
mm,
their pitch is.
hmm
And what I remember too is specifically like I would have one VC tell me, you're saying this story all wrong. You need to do X, Y, and Z. So I go home that night and change the whole deck and tell XYZ story and then go back and pitch it the next day. I'm like, oh no, that's all wrong. You need to be saying the story that I've changed it three times before. So kind of have to incrementally get better and learn and take incremental improvements. But yeah, it's I think a lot of people misunderestimate the amount of effort it takes to raise a round of funding. I mean, what I tell people now is to get your first term sheet, whether you're based in the Valley or based in North Carolina or based in the UK, you should really expect 100 no's before you get your first term sheet.
Yeah.
That's kind of standard or more.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you find that things have changed now with access to Zoom and things like that, or does it still have to be face to face?
I haven't really, I think kind of I haven't really pitched as a CEO, since the dawn of Zoom. I would imagine my expectation would be you can cover a lot more ground as an investor or an entrepreneur in 20-minute kind of, hey, let's see if this is a potential fit for the investment thesis with our fund pretty quickly. So I think you can probably cover a lot more ground. But I mean, one of the things I kind of come back to time and time again is, there's such the personal relationship between the investor and the founder is so critical. You really need to be in person to develop those, right? So you
Mm,
can give a pitch in person, but it's those in-person interactions, those, kind of off-camera interactions that are just so critical to building that trust and rapport and credibility on a one-on-one basis between the investor and the founder that I think are just, super important.
yeah. Do you have any memories of pitch gone disastrous, or have you blocked all of those mentally out of your head?
Oh, I'm sure there are frankly hundreds of them that went really badly. I've done a lot of those. I don't remember a specific pitch that went horribly. I remember a pretty specific venture, a company I was in that kind of stands out. Like, there's a bunch of bad experiences or challenging experiences, of course, in the entrepreneurial startup journey. But I do remember one that was, and I'll try to remember the details the best I can, but um, it was basically I was the VP of sales, so I was on the exec team, but I wasn't the CEO. But we raised a $5 million A round of funding. So we'd already raised some seed. We raised a $5 million A round of funding, but it was tranched. So they basically say, okay, we'll give you 2.5 million now, and then based on milestones, we'll give you another 2.5 million. And so we hit all the milestones, no problem. Went back to the investor and said, hey, we've hit all our milestones. We're ready for the other 2.5 million. And this was during kind of the dot-com meltdown, right? And so what
So
we
this
didn't
is
really
2000 then? Okay.
2000,
Okay.
2001
Okay.
kind of time frame. And we didn't really understand. I didn't understand. I understand it now. This particular fund was structured as a capital call. So it wasn't a captive fund where they had a big pot of money. When they
Okay.
had to make investments, they basically rang up the phone to their investors and say, send your money
Got it.
in.
Got
But
it.
the
So they
problem
were
was
probably having trouble getting their investors to send their money in.
the problem was that they weren't hitting their milestones for the capital call requirements. So their investors were no longer obligated to invest. They had money. But they
Got
didn't
it.
tell us that. They kept
Mm,
us running us through hoops.
mm,
And long story short, they basically would say, okay, well, we want you to do X, Y, and Z. So here's $100,000 for this month, but we're going to charge you for it. The terms are bad. And at the
mm,
end of the day, like we did that dozens of times. The company ended up at the end of the day having a really nice exit, but they bridged it to death. Like the
mm,
founder walked away with less than 1% equity at exit.
mm.
We were bridged on a weekly basis. So kind of my big learning from that is never, ever, ever do a tranche deal. If someone commits money, have them write the full check. Either they believe in you and your product and your team, or they do not. Don't get halfway married on this thing. Like if you're going to
Right.
come in, let's do it all. Don't ever do a tranche deal. Was my big takeaway from that.
Right. Right. And what have the last few years been like with investing, with the startup world? Because, during COVID, it was a weird environment. There was a lot of money that was being poured in from venture capitals, from investors, and then it kind of dried up in 2024.
Yeah, great question. So, the last couple of years, we've spent a lot of time in Europe. So, like our kind of specialty, our ICP is helping European venture-backed tech companies launch and scale in the US. So, I kind of have more of a slant on that view from a European market perspective more than a domestic market perspective at this point. But I think what's kind of common in Europe we see is, there's seed kind of money available for companies who have good product market fit signals and traction and revenue and those sort of things. But there's limited later round money in Europe, in the UK and Europe. And so it's like a pretty common phenomenon is a company will raise a seed round, maybe an A round, but after that, they pretty much have to come to the US. And of course, I'm old enough now where I've seen the hype cycles come through multiple times in whatever the hot,
Crypto, AI, you
all that,
name it. Yeah.
even mobile, social. I mean, I'm old
Uh-huh.
enough for all those sort of things.
Yeah.
And so, you have to kind of expect to have those rides. But look, I mean, raising venture capital, I think it's oversold as something that's easy to do. Very few companies successfully raise an A round, and even fewer because the success metrics to raise a B round are ridiculously high. And
Mhm.
so the attrition rate from people who are lucky enough, very few companies raise C, but the attrition rate as you kind of go on that venture journey become increasingly more difficult. I think people think it's easier from seed to A or A to B, and it's the opposite of that. The pressure to actually show performance and product and competition and why you're going to beat Google in this particular marketplace, that gets really hard the further you go.
And we talked earlier about the difficulties of being outside of the Bay Area and raising money for your startup if you're from the East Coast or North Carolina. Now you're CEO of US Expansion Partners, and so you're helping these companies from Europe come over to the United States. Is it equally harder or exponentially harder for European companies to pitch in the Bay Area and to network and build connections?
Well, it depends. And so we've kind of put together a methodology kind of based on all my learnings of doing this, from North Carolina. And there's kind of a three-step process we want people to understand because I regularly, because I'm starting to get some visibility in Europe, I regularly get calls from CEOs and entrepreneurs in Europe saying, the first thing they ask is, hey, David, can you help introduce me to investors in the US?
Hmm.
And what they don't realize, if you're in Copenhagen or if you're in Munich, there's a handful of venture funds in that region. What the people don't realize coming to the US for the first time is that there are over 5,000 venture funds in the US, right?
Yeah.
5,000. So if you call me and say, hey, David, can you help me with investor introductions? I need a little bit more to go on, right?
Yeah.
That's a tough ask. And so I think whether people are raising capital in the US or internationally into the US, there's kind of three things you need to think about. The first is identifying the right venture funds. Most venture funds, the general partners, when they go out to raise money from limited partners, they go out with a very specific investment thesis, meaning we have unique insights into a particular market, a particular geography. So let's just call it, for sake of argument, we have unique insights into seed round deals and e-commerce for female athletes, apparel, like something super specific. And so that's called their investment thesis. So when they go out to raise money from limited partners, they have an investment thesis. So really the secret is to find, as an entrepreneur trying to raise capital, find venture funds who have an investment thesis that aligns with your company. So for example, if I'm an e-commerce startup and you are a clean tech growth investor, no matter how passionate I am or how excited or how much market traction I have, you're never, ever, ever going to write me a check. So kind of the
Yeah.
first step in the process is understanding how investment theses work for a VC fund, what their investment theses are, and then find a VC funds who have a specific investment thesis that aligns really well with your company. And one of those thesis elements is geography. What I learned is there are some venture funds who only invest in California or only invest in New York City. So if you're coming from North Carolina, or if you're coming from Atlanta, or if you're coming from Berlin, they're not going to invest in you.
So kind of like the investor from LA for you, that probably isn't necessarily advertised on their website or not broadly.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. So what you can do though is like you can go to databases like Crunchbase or PitchBook or ShipShape, and you can actually run a sort. And so you can actively look and see when's the last time they invested in my geography. And what I tell
Mm.
entrepreneurs in the UK and Germany, for example, is if they've never written a check in Europe before, you're not going to be the first,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You move on to, there's 5,000, move on to find another one. But one thing I did learn is I used to set up alerts in Crunchbase. So anytime a venture deal got closed in North Carolina, I got an alert.
Smart.
Immediately, if I would look at that fund, if that fund would align even potentially with my company, I'm on the phone to that CEO
Mm.
saying, "Hey, I see, this
Mm.
fund just invested in you. We're a fit for their investment thesis. When's the next time that partner's coming in for a board meeting? Because I'd like to meet them."
Oh, and that worked?
Oh yeah, a lot,
Yeah.
right? 'Cause
Very
I've
cool.
already overcome that hurdle. I already know that particular fund has invested
Right.
in North Carolina, and I know that partner's coming on a plane. So
What do
that
you
was a
think it
big one.
is? You think, just like an openness to the geography or something like that? Or maybe they had an aunt or an uncle who's from North Carolina? Like, what is it?
There's some of those things, or they eventually find a deal they just can't pass up. It's so great, or they have a very specific sector thesis, and it just turns out that best deal in that particular sector happens to be in North Carolina, or happens to be in London, or happens to be in Germany.
But then it opens their eyes to, companies that are from this region of the world, whether it's North Carolina or Germany or Denmark or whatever, there's some great companies that come from this part of the
Right,
world.
because they're
Yeah.
gonna they're most venture capital partners are type A, right? They're not going to come and spend leisurely time on the trip. They're going to want to work, and they're going to want to network with other investors and see what other investment possibilities are there. So once you get that first one in, it'll really open the doors. In fact, today there are over 60 U.S. funds who have a satellite office in London looking for deal flow.
Wow, wow. And, it's funny, I'm going to speak in Seattle at an entrepreneurs group next week, and I was trying to figure out a time to meet for coffee with a client of ours. And so I was using AI to find a coffee shop that was close to the speaking opportunity and the hotel I'm staying at. So has AI sped up this process for you? These different hacks and things like that, and finding the right, companies and portfolio companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really can. So there's a couple of tools that I use personally, and then I also advise kind of clients to use that. I kind of a combination of things. So our ICP is a company from Europe who's just closed $5 million or more in venture funding. That's kind of our. So I kind of use a combination of things. So I have a report set up in Crunchbase. Every week I get a list of any company in Europe who closes more than a $5 million round, and then I use a AI tool called Seamless AI to look up the LinkedIn addresses of the exec team and the LinkedIn addresses of their investors.
Mm.
And then I use a tool called Dripify to do a LinkedIn campaign. So it'll come in as a connection request, not an in-mail. It'll come in as a personalized. It's all automated. It comes as a personalized LinkedIn connection request saying, "Hey, congratulations on your round of funding. We help companies launch in the US. We'd love to connect with you here." And then there's all these automations where it'll automatically like their post or start following them or this and that. And then if they reply, I kind of have some follow-up communications. And so it's a combination of like Crunchbase, Seamless AI, and Dripify is kind of an automation we have in place. Our firm uses, and we also have some clients that are doing the same.
And then, yeah, I imagine you advise them to do something similar with their reach out. Yeah. Yeah. David, this has been fascinating. I'm almost out of time, so I want to wrap up with my last question, which is my gratitude question. I'm a big fan of giving my guests the opportunity to thank and acknowledge and give a shout out to, especially to peers or contemporaries that have helped you in your journey, or maybe mentors. Who would you want to acknowledge?
Well, we talked about this earlier, and the first thing popped in my head, we talked about when we first got on the line today is, man, I just have a lot of gratitude to all the CEOs who helped me kind of sight unseen. They're just going to help. You call and ask them for an introduction, they do it, and you're always like, wow, that's amazing. And I try to carry that forward the best I can. If someone asks me for an introduction, if I can ever be helpful, I'm go out of my way to try and be helpful. So that's a piece of it. And I think the entrepreneurial road is it's pretty tough, and there's a lot of low points along the way. And I think kind of both my parents have been super supportive. My whole family, my wife, my parents, my kids. If I could give myself any advice looking back, I would say you're never once going to miss a payroll for your team. I've missed a few myself, but never miss a payroll for my team. And you're never once going to miss a mortgage payment. I think had I known that ahead of time, it would have taken a lot of stress off. But to have those people in your life who kind of support you on that journey is really invaluable. And there's just really no way to give enough gratitude for that support that it takes on that journey, because it's a rough ride.
Yeah, yeah. David, where can people go to learn more about you and learn more about U.S. Expansion Partners?
So our website's at usexpansionpartners.com, a very descriptive URL and company name. And I'm online at LinkedIn and Twitter and those sort of things at David B. Rose.
All right, David, thanks so much.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.